Hey church, Pastor Chris coming to you here for Good Friday. And normally we would be having a Good Friday service today, but as you can see, we're in a time of quarantine. We're in a time in which we got to practice social distancing in order to try to protect each other and keep each other safe and healthy. And so we're not able to have a full-on Good Friday service, but I still wanted to come to you and bring you a little bit of a word, bring you a little bit of a message, maybe of hope, maybe of encouragement, and also one that just maybe requires a little bit of contemplation, a little bit of thinking, a little bit of sitting with where we are and inviting Christ to join us in this place that we find ourselves in the world. And so with that, I want to take you back to January 26th of this year. Now that day was a Sunday, and I remember that day really, really vividly because I had gone home to take my Sunday afternoon nap. And I love my Sunday afternoon nap because it's a wonderful time. And in January, you tend to think that that's a good time of the year because it's a new year, new start. People are doing their Whole30s. People are doing their Beachbody challenges. It's the beginning of the year. Everything is going really, really well. And yet I woke up from my nap on January 26th to some absolutely terrible news. So some terrible news as a human being and some terrible news as a fan of sports and as a fan of basketball. And that news on January 26th was that Kobe Bryant had passed away in a helicopter accident. And in that moment, I think the world collectively realized that something was not okay. But yet so often in our world, I think maybe we like to shy away from the not okay. And so we go into the new year, we go into these new seasons looking for the good things, trying to only focus on what's positive. We have these mottos like choose joy. We have these ideas like stay victorious, and we like to push for the positive things. We encourage positive thinking, positive outcome, and all of these. But yet sometimes life comes crashing in the form of brokenness. And I think this year, maybe more than any other year that I've experienced, has brought about some intense brokenness. Maybe it started with the death of Kobe Bryant. Maybe it started with the death of a loved one for you. But we have seen some incredibly crazy things happen this year in the midst of the coronavirus and in the midst of living in pandemic life, in the midst of so many people losing their jobs and livelihoods. We sit in a world that is immensely broken. And we started this journey of Lent that we find ourselves in. We're at Good Friday now, but this journey started on Ash Wednesday. In Ash Wednesday, we talked about this idea of the depth of sin in our world, the stranglehold that sin seems to have on so many areas of our world. And we talked about the need to have a hunger and a thirst for a justice and a righteousness that can directly combat the sin that is in our world, that can directly combat the brokenness that is in our world. And we talked about this idea of moving into a season of fasting that would cause us to develop such a hunger and thirst for justice and righteousness that we would become a people who begin to look more and more like Christ as we move through it. And yet we find ourselves at the end of this season of Lent on Good Friday. And rather than feeling like we have defeated brokenness and sin, we find ourselves in a world that seems more and more defeated. In the midst of this time, going through the coronavirus pandemic, going through all of this economic hardship in which people are losing their jobs and their livelihoods, in which people are having strife in their own household, in which there is not only illness due to COVID, but there's also other kinds of illness breaking in. We feel the weight of the world so deeply right now. We feel the weight of brokenness so deeply. And with that, I hearken back to, I said hearken, yes, we hearken back to Matthew, the 27th chapter. And I think as we're experiencing this brokenness, maybe we can look to Scripture and see that Christ himself stepped into the brokenness of the world with us. And so it says in Matthew, the 27th chapter, starting in verse 45, from noon to 3, the whole earth was dark. Around mid-afternoon, Jesus groaned out of the depths, crying loudly, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you abandoned me? This is a strange passage. It's a strange portion of Scripture, a strange idea to be talking about on a day that we call Good Friday, because nothing seems good about it. The Messiah that had come, the one who was supposed to bring about victory, the one who was supposed to bring about an end to oppression, and an end to sickness, and an end to death, and an end to all that was bad, seems like he is stepping into the very badness and experiencing death, which seems to be the absolute worst form of badness. And yet those who would have heard that passage at the time, those who would have heard, my God, why have you abandoned me? My God, why have you forsaken me? Would have been taken back to the 22nd Psalm. It's a Psalm of David in which we realize that David is feeling feelings of darkness and of dryness and feelings like God is not present. And in this we see that he is doubled up with pain, and he feels like he's calling to God and no one is answering. He feels like he's tossing and turning in the night and nobody is there. These passages don't seem all that hopeful. And yet we know that there is a glimpse of hope, because at the end of the 22nd Psalm, it is this beautiful picture of all of humankind coming together and gathering in worship and sitting at the Lord's table and eating plenty. And it is this image of children and babies and parents living in the midst of this idea of good news and rescue. And yet, in order to understand how good the good news of being rescued is, sometimes we have to sit in the not okayness. Sometimes we have to sit in the brokenness. We have to sit in the brokenness of watching our heroes and our friends pass on. And this past year was a tough one for me, because I lost my grandfather, and I remember getting the phone call that had happened and sitting in this sense of brokenness, feeling like maybe I had been abandoned. Because you see, during all of this time, my grandpa was dealing with health issues, and we were praying that God would offer healing and deliverance. We were praying that there would be a mighty mystical work of God that would move in his life and bring about healing, that there would be full recovery, and yet the outcome was not full recovery. And I remember in that moment the feeling of brokenness, the feeling of being abandoned, the feeling of being God-forsaken, and thinking maybe God hadn't heard my prayers. Maybe God hadn't listened to what I was saying. Maybe I did something, and because of something that I did, God had not listened to my cries for help. And I remember sitting in this moment, realizing this brokenness. But then we had church a few days later, the next day. And whenever we were at church, we had a guest group come in and lead worship for us. And some of you remember this group from SMU came in. And they sang this song called Here Again. And there's this line in it, not for a moment was I forsaken. The Lord is in this place. And as I sat there experiencing the immense brokenness of losing my grandfather, I came to this realization that Christ was fully present in that moment. That Christ was fully, fully with me in that moment. That I was not abandoned, that I was not forsaken, that it wasn't because of anything that I had done. But yet, in the midst of the brokenness, Christ was with me. And so we're living in a season right now in which there's a lot of brokenness. There's a lot of sin. We see sin rearing its ugly face in our world in the form of illness and in the form of injustice and in the form of so much death and sickness and pain. And yet in the midst of that, we understand something beautiful. That in fact, God has not forsaken us. That the Lord is in fact in this place alongside us. And that maybe the greatest thing we can do in moments of brokenness and hurt and pain is to invite Christ to join us, to invite God into our very presence, and to allow God to sit with us in the brokenness, in a realization that we are not forsaken, that we are not alone, that we are not sitting in solitude, but that we are living in a place in which the light of Christ can shine through us. That we understand that there is an end game in place in which resurrection is around the corner. And even though resurrection is around the corner, it's still okay to admit that the current situation is not okay. But we know that resurrection is around the corner. We know that there will be a day, as the 22nd Psalm says, that all the power mongers are before him worshiping, and all the poor and powerless too are worshiping. And along with those who never got it together, they are all worshiping. Our children and their children will get in on this as the word is passed along from parent to child. Babies not yet conceived will hear the good news that God does what he says. That our God is not a God who abandons or forsakes, but that our God is a God who sits with us in the midst of our brokenness. It says that we are not alone. It says that we are loved. It says that we are forgiven. It says that we are worthy. And that in that, a sense of peace that surpasses all understanding can fill us and can give us the hope that resurrection is around the corner. So, church, I hope today that you can recognize that it is okay that things are not okay. And that maybe we could be a people who, as we gather as families around dinner tables, as we gather as families in our living rooms, as we gather as families wherever we are, that there would be a transparency that exists in our households and a willingness to open up about the things that are not okay in our life. The things that are just simply seeming bad at the moment in our lives, and that in that we would invite each other, and in that we as families and communities would invite God to sit there with us, recognizing that we are a people who are not forsaken, but that we are a people who are loved, and that we are a people who look forward to the resurrection to come. So, church, I hope that this message offers a message of hope, but that this word also gives you the courage and the permission to admit when things are not okay, and yet invite Christ into those moments. And with that, church, I hope that you will join us this Sunday as we gather online for our Easter service, and things are going to be weird and things are going to be different, and things are not fully okay right now, and that is okay, because in the midst of the brokenness, Christ will meet us. The Spirit of God will dwell in our midst, and we have the opportunity now more than ever to be the presence of love and peace and grace in the world. May the grace and peace of Christ be with you.